The first time I was able to get my hands on the 2019 turbocharged Mazda CX-5 was in a blizzard in Canada. The second time has been here in Northern California during a week where it has rained non-stop for 6 days. Now, fortunately, the first day we had the CX-5, it was dry, and we were able to do our usual 0 to 60 tests, our handling tests, and of course, drive this on our usual test course. The big news for 2019 is the turbocharged engine under the hood, which has been borrowed from the larger CX-9. So in this video, we are going to be focusing mainly on the top two trims and the turbocharged engine because this is what's all new for this model year. The CX-5 has been with us for a while, but back in 2017, Mazda decided to give this such a significant refresh that it almost qualifies as a redesign. Part of that new design was this very attractive front end. In my opinion, this front end alone makes the CX-5 easily the most attractive entry in the mainstream compact crossover segment, and I think this even does very well when you compare this to near luxury entries, something like the Acura RDX or the Buick Envision in that next category up. We have this strong chrome bar right here that dips down and forms part of that grille. We have standard LED headlamps. If you opt for the top end trims, then we do get steering LED headlamps. That large Mazda logo hides a radar adaptive cruise control sensor, and since we're in the top end trim, we also have parking sensors up front. Be sure and let me know what you think about the overall design of the CX-5 down there in the comment section below. Do you agree with me that this is one of the most attractive entries, or do you think one of the newer crossovers is a little bit prettier? In addition to the standard LED headlamps and available steering headlamps, other standard feature equipment in the CX-5 includes standard blind spot monitoring with rear cross traffic detection and low-speed autonomous braking. That's enabled by a laser scanner right here behind the windscreen. You'll notice that we don't get standard radar adaptive cruise control in the CX-5 like we do find in something like the new Toyota RAV4. However, touring trims and above do get that particular feature standard. They also get lane keeping, an expanded auto brake system that also includes pedestrian detection and automatic high beams. The signature trim that we're driving this week includes some additional features like the 360-degree camera system. There's a camera in the front, cameras under the side view mirrors to give you a better idea of what you're driving over, and of course the parking sensors I noted up front. At 179 inches long, the CX-5 is on the shorter side of the compact crossover segment, although as you can see in the chart down below you, there are a few entries that are a little bit shorter. The downside to the overall length of the CX-5 is that we find a little bit less cargo room in the back behind the second row, about 25% less than we find in something like a CR-V or some of the larger options. When you look at the chart down there, you'll notice that the Rogue and the Tiguan are significantly larger than the CX-5. That's because they were designed to accommodate an optional third row behind, although for some reason only the Volkswagen gets that optional third row for 2019. Even though the CX-5 is about the same size as the Honda CR-V, we get less cargo room in the back because we have this long hood proportion up front. This is part of what makes the CX-5 so attractive in this segment. We have a much longer hood to body ratio than we find in basically any of the other entries. It helps make this look more like a premium or perhaps even a near luxury vehicle. That's all due to the overall drivetrain design under the hood. This has kind of an unusual exhaust manifold in the base engine design, and that needed more space up front. They had to make the hood a little bit longer. They also had to push the wheel a little bit further forward. The result of that, like we see in modern Volvo models, is that this has a more attractive side profile, even though it is a little bit less space efficient. So there's a pro and con going on there. Out back, we find full LED tail lamp modules, including LED amber turn signals that you can see over there on that other side, and twin exhaust tips at the bottom. Again, the parking sensors that you'll find only on the top end trim. And the overall style is definitely restrained, and I think actually reminds me a little bit of some modern Infinitis. Let me know what you think about that down there below. Back in 2017, Mazda was promising us a 2.2-liter turbo diesel under this hood. It's interesting that for 2019, they seem to have quietly dropped that option from their spec sheet. But on the bright side, we do get this all-new 2.5-liter turbocharged engine. It produces 227 horsepower or 250 horsepower, depending on what kind of fuel you feed it. This will run on regular unleaded, but if you give it premium, it will produce the higher horsepower number. Regardless of what you give the engine, however, torque comes in at a whopping 310. This engine is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, no 8, 9, or 10 speeds under here, and standard all-wheel drive to help harness all that torque. Fuel economy comes in at 24 miles per gallon, which is notably below the standard 2.5-liter engine. That engine produces a lot less power, though, at 187 horsepower, but it does feature a cylinder deactivation system to help give it up to 28 miles per gallon. Instead of focusing on outright performance, Mazda has generally focused on overall driving dynamics. And I'm not necessarily talking about handling here, as we'll discuss later. I'm talking about overall handling feel. And that's one of the reasons that this turbocharged CX-5 does not get upgraded tires versus the regular model. So we still have 225 width tires, both front and rear. Those are the same tire size you find all the way across the CX-5 lineup. Although it is worth noting that you can apparently fit 245 width tires in these wheel wells, you will likely just have to buy wider wheels. Why should you care about tire size? Well, the answer is actually pretty easy, because this turbocharged model weighs up to 300 pounds more than the non-turbo model. If you're comparing like to like, this is about 150 pounds heavier. If you're comparing this to the front-wheel drive trim, this is about 300 pounds heavier. By having the same tire size in neutral handling situations, this actually may not handle as well as the base trim of CX-5. So it's one of the reasons you might want to upgrade the tires aftermarket. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give most trims of the CX-5 9 out of 10 points. We have a two-way adjustable lumbar support that is memory linked to the two-position driver's memory, but you will find four-way lumbar support in some of the competition. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion, but of course the passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. It is lacking the adjustable lumbar support. A lot of folks on our Facebook channel were asking me to compare the CX-5 to the next category up, something like the Acura RDX, because in this top-end CX-5 trim, Mazda is trying to push their way upmarket a little bit. But there is still a pretty distinct difference in terms of overall comfort between the CX-5 and the luxury category. The luxury category, you're likely to find thigh cushion extensions, four-way adjustable lumbar support, and of course, more comfortable and more adjustable passenger seats. When it comes to overall rear seat comfort, I'm going to have to drop these rear seats down to 9 out of 10 points because we do find more legroom in some of the competition. Headroom is very generous in the back of the CX-5. I still have about 2 or 3 inches of headroom left, and I really have no trouble sitting behind myself with the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. The rear seats also have a 2-stage recline mechanism. This is the most upright, and then we get about an inch of recline right there. If I move over to the middle seat, the headroom is generous enough that I still have about 3 inches left sitting right here in the middle. But you'll notice that legroom is a little bit larger in some of the larger models in this segment, because if I move all the way over to the right side where the front seat is all the way back in its tracks, my knees do dig just a little bit into that rear seat back. A really nice touch in the CX-5 is that we have a 40-20-40 folding rear seat back. That makes this a lot more convenient than some of those ski pass-throughs that we find in some of the competition, or just a standard 60-40 folding seat back, because we can put large items right here through the vehicle or just pull things right back there from the cargo area into the passenger area. If you're the kind of person that wants to carry skis or snowboards or that sort of thing in your vehicle, this is going to be a lot easier to do than some of those other alternatives. The one major drawback that a lot of people have commented on with the CX-5 is the size of the cargo area back here. We find 25% less storage space in the CX-5 than the Honda CR-V. In fact, in terms of overall storage capacity, 30.9 cubic feet of cargo space is at the bottom of the list really for a compact crossover in America. Now personally, I think this is a fairly small price to pay for the rest of the CX-5 because we still have the ability to put a decent number of bags back here, and 30.9 cubic feet is still well above the average family sedan in America. And family sedans and compact crossovers are honestly vehicles that are generally compared with one another. In case you're wondering, we do have a spare tire under the cargo area load floor. It's a donut variety, and this is also where Mazda puts the subwoofer for the top-end audio system. Likely because of the overall age of the CX-5, we don't find a panoramic moonroof available in this particular model yet, so even this top-end trim gets a pretty standard-sized moonroof. As we look around, keep in mind that we are in the signature trim of the CX-5, which is the very top-end model. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. The upholstery color in this particular trim is a dark brown, and the leather is an upgraded Napa leather. That's one of the things we get in the top-end signature trim. In addition to that, we get heated and ventilated front seats and heated rear seats. And a feature very rarely seen in non-luxury models, we actually get real wood trim inside this cabin. You'll find it on the front, rear doors, and on the dashboard. Be sure and let me know what you think about this trim down there in the comments section below. Personally, I wish it had been something a little bit lighter, perhaps something that had contrasted a bit more, maybe something that was open pore. The reason for that is that during my week with this vehicle, when other people got in the car, I found myself constantly telling them, no, that's really real wood trim. And that's a little bit different than what we see, for instance, in the new Ram 1500, which has a rough grain open pore wood trim, so people immediately know that's wood, and then they're amazed by it when they hop in the cabin. As you'd expect out of a top-end trim, we have more premium materials on the doors and on the dashboard. The doors are actually a two-tone design, so this bottom section is actually brown that matches the seats. We have some stitching going on the top of the door and on the top of the dashboard to help dress it up. And you can see that we have a Bose tweeter right there in that A-pillar. The upper portion of the dashboard is a soft touch injection molded piece. We still have a standard 7-inch infotainment system mounted right there in the center of the dashboard. And then over here on the driver's side, this hump becomes more pronounced for 2019 because we now have an optional heads-up display that is actually projected on the windscreen, not a little bit of plastic that hovers right here over the instrument cluster. Although the 7-inch touchscreen is standard, smartphone integration is not. You actually have to work your way on up one trim in order to get Apple CarPlay here. Now this is a touchscreen display, so we can actually click options right there as long as you're parked. When the vehicle is in motion, you do have to use an iDrive-like controller knob in the middle of the dashboard. Mazda tells us that they're doing this because of overall safety, although it is worth noting that you can aftermarket get some options that will allow you to touch the screen even when in motion. Below the infotainment screen, we find two large air vents, the hazard light button right there, engine start-stop button, the button to enable and disable the heated steering wheel function. There's nothing right over here on this side, just a blank. We then have the heated seat and ventilated seat buttons right down there, and the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control system. The transmission shifter is a pretty traditional console design. Drive is all the way back like that. Manual mode, we pull to the left. We then push away from the driver for gear down, pull towards the driver for gear up. That's slightly reversed from some other cars out there. There's also a drive mode button right here. It allows us to toggle between normal and sport modes. And then we have a storage compartment right up front there with no lid, but it is large enough to put some of those larger smartphones in. There are no USB ports in that storage area, so if you're like me, you just end up having your cable dangling around the car all the time. We have an electric parking brake right here, auto brake hold, and then the controller for that infotainment system. There's a back button, direct access to the media, home, nav button, and then a favorites button right over here. The nav button will take you to the Apple CarPlay interface if it's enabled, or of course the Android Auto interface. Home button takes you to the home of the smartphone interface unless you press and hold it, and then it will actually take you to the Mazda native interface. That is a handy touch. Over here we have the power and volume toggles. We push for mute and then rotate around for volume. Two large cup holders back here with no lid. And then a padded armrest that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage cubby. We have one small tray here where you can put keys, wallets, that sort of thing. The two USB inputs for the system, SD card for the navigation database, and auxiliary input as well. Mazda swiped their partial LCD instrument cluster from some of their more expensive vehicles, so we have some physical dials over here, one for the engine temperature and fuel level, and then one for the tachometer over here on the left. Everything from this miles per gallon gauge to this, for some reason, secondary fuel level gauge right over here is actually being displayed by the color LCD in the middle. This LCD is not as configurable as some of the competition's displays, but we can toggle through our various displays of navigation, safety system status, trip fuel economy. We also have service intervals, or we could turn everything off and just get a larger needle right there on the speedometer. One thing that surprises me is that we still don't find shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel. So if you want to shift yourself, you still have to use the shifter in the center console. This is a round 3-spoke steering wheel design with sport grips up top. On the left side of the wheel, we find the buttons for the cruise control system. We do have the adaptive cruise control in this particular model. And then on the left side, we have the controls for the infotainment system. These are toggles with a button in the middle. So we toggle up and down for volume up, down, and then click in the middle for the voice command button. Track forward, backward over here, and then the info button controls that multifunction display in the instrument cluster. We also have some dedicated phone buttons on the bottom. The first thing you'll notice immediately about the CX-5 out on the road is the amount of power we have out of this turbocharged engine and how different it makes the CX-5 feel. 0 to 60 happened in just over 6.4 seconds, which means this is about the same 0 to 60 time as the Mazda 6 with the same engine. Now the Mazda 6 is actually a little bit lighter than this, but it's front-wheel drive only. And in the CX-5, you cannot get the turbo with front-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is standard. That extra traction is really what helps this vehicle get 0 to 60 in that same time frame, because the 0 to 30 time is much shorter. Now, in the quarter-mile time, this is going to be a little bit slower than the CX-5 because of the added weight. That makes the CX-5, at the moment, the fastest vehicle we have tested in this segment. This beats the last generation Forester XT. It also beats the Jeep Cherokee with the 3.2-liter V6 engine, the Honda CR-V, and even the Kia Sportage with the 2-liter turbo. The last time we had the Sportage with the 2-liter turbo, I have to say that I was a little bit disappointed in the overall performance. In this generation of the Kia, they actually decided to detune the engine a little bit, and the difference is noticeable. Now, on the downside, this is not going to be quite as quick as something like an Acura RDX. I know a lot of you were asking about that. The reason is that even though we have 250 horsepower and a massive amount of torque, we still have Mazda's older 6-speed automatic transmission. If this had one of the newer 8, 9, or 10-speed automatic transmissions, it would likely be notably faster 0 to 60. The big difference is that first gear in this vehicle is not as low as the first gear that we find in the Acura RDX, and that's part of why that RDX gets such excellent 0 to 60 times. In our braking test, this model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 125 feet. That's sort of middle of the pack for this particular group. A Kia Sportage in top-end trims would stop shorter because it has wider tires. And the narrower tires in this turbo model definitely affect not only the braking, but also the overall handling ability of the CX-5. Now, as I've said before, Mazda is about handling feel, handling precision, not necessarily about grip, because grip levels are actually higher in something like that Kia Sportage than in this CX-5 Turbo. But the overall steering feel, the overall engagement factor in the CX-5 is quite simply the best in this segment. This is not really much of a problem, I think, because you could put wider tires and grippier tires on this aftermarket and seriously improve the overall grip, but there's really nothing you could do easily aftermarket to improve the overall feel in the competition. So this is actually going to be my preferred alternative, to get the vehicle that feels better, feels more engaging, and then actually help it be more dynamic and handle better by putting grippier tires on aftermarket. The difference is definitely noticeable when you start chucking the CX-5 around in corners. Now, obviously, this is a slippery wet road because this is the first day in 6 days that it hasn't been absolutely pouring down, but trust me, we were able to drive this out on dry pavement on this same road and some other roads that we used to test, and it is an absolute hoot and a half to drive. The one slight benefit of having 6 gears instead of 8, 9, or 10 is that it does take this transmission a little bit less time to find the right gear that it's interested in, because there just aren't as many. However, when it comes to the absolute handling score, I'm going to have to give the CX-5 a B+, because I had expected this model to get wider tires and be a little bit more competitive when it came to actual grip numbers. But again, that is something that you can handle on your own aftermarket. Back in 2017, when Mazda made the last significant revision to the CX-5, one of the things they did was actually make the suspension a little bit softer, because people thought that the CX-5 previously was just a little bit too firm for this segment. Although a lot of people complained, I actually think that Mazda was right to do this, because I generally don't like a vehicle that's too firm. I think that the CX-5 actually has a nice balance to it. It obviously handles well, and we have good handling feel as you'd expect out of a Mazda, but the overall ride quality is definitely better than some of the very firm entries in this segment, like the sporty versions of the Kia Sportage. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and give this an A- when it comes to the overall ride. The narrower tires likely contribute to the quieter cabin that we find in the CX-5 versus some of the competition. I'm going to give this an A when it comes to overall cabin quietness because we scored 70 decibels in here. This makes this one of the quieter entries in the compact crossover segment. When it comes to overall fuel economy, we've been averaging about 21 miles per gallon in mixed driving this week. That likely has something to do with the weather, but also the way that we've been driving the CX-5, because this is just an awful lot of fun. This turbocharged engine definitely has a lot of strong pull to it. It doesn't need to downshift as often when you're going up hills. It makes it feel more engaging than pretty much anything else in this particular segment. Although using all that power obviously is going to consume more gasoline, and that's why the fuel economy in this vehicle has been overall pretty similar to some of the older V6 options that used to exist in this segment. Now, if you were treating the CX-5 gently and you had a majority highway commute, then I suspect you will be able to get at or above what the EPA says you should get here. A big reason that I'm giving fuel economy a C+ here is that the base model of the CX-5 is just not as efficient as some of the competition. If you get the front-wheel drive 2.5-liter engine with cylinder deactivation, you'll get 28 miles per gallon on average according to the EPA. That is notably below many of the high-efficiency options in this segment with the continuously variable transmission, or something like the brand new Toyota RAV4 with its hybrid system available. You will definitely get better fuel economy in an all-wheel drive Subaru Forester than in the front-wheel drive Mazda CX-5, so fuel economy is definitely a little bit behind the competition. In my mind, I think it's an okay trade-off to give up a little bit of fuel economy and a little bit of overall grip to get the added fun factor and overall precision that we find in the CX-5. It really is something that you'll have to decide for yourself. The previous CX-5 definitely had the driving dynamics to make it one of the most fun entries in this segment, but the overall acceleration was definitely lacking. 0 to 60 happened in over 8 seconds, actually making the previous CX-5 that we tested one of the slowest entries available here. But now Mazda has gone in an entirely different direction and given us, quite simply, the fastest entry in this segment. So this is now the fastest entry in the segment, the best looking entry in this segment, and it has the best precision. The only thing it's lacking again really is the overall handling ability, and that's something that you could logically fix yourself after you buy it. For 2019, the CX-5 starts at $24,350. That is a little bit more than some of the value alternatives in this segment, like the Subaru Forester, which does come a little bit less expensive and has standard all-wheel drive. Keep in mind that with the base model of CX-5, we have a little bit more standard equipment than we see in some of the competition. We have alloy wheels, we have LED headlamps, and a leather-wrapped steering wheel. But if you want some of the more premium features like 2-zone climate control, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, etc., that we do find standard in some of the competition, you have to work your way on up to the next trim, which is the $26,615 Touring package. Of course, we're here to talk about the turbocharged engine, and that will first start in the $34,870 Grand Touring Reserve package. This package gives you a little bit more feature content than the naturally aspirated 2.5-liter Grand Touring package, and we get the LCD instrument cluster that we saw in this particular model. In terms of overall price tag, the 2.5-liter turbo compares fairly well to the mainline competitors. We have an all-new RAV4 for 2019. That was a pretty big surprise because it's more attractive than before, it's loaded with more active safety tech, it has one of the most off-road capable all-wheel drive systems in this particular segment, and it's actually a pretty good deal in general terms as well. But when you start taking a look at the top-end trims of the RAV4, it ends up being fairly slow because Toyota does not give you a more powerful engine option, really. We have the hybrid system, which is a little bit more powerful, but is really more fuel economy focused. It's not really performance-oriented. And for the Mazda, when you work your way up to the top-end trims, we get a significantly more powerful engine. Also important to keep in mind, when you work your way on up to the top-end trims of the RAV4 or CX-5, not only do we get more power in the Mazda, but it's also going to be less expensive, because a top-end limited trim of the RAV4 would actually be about $1,000 more than the comparably equipped Mazda, and it's not going to have all of those same luxury features, especially like the real wood trim. Toyota has made a pretty big deal out of their new torque vectoring axle in the RAV4, and this has led a lot of people to ask, does it handle more like the Acura super handling all-wheel drive system? The answer is no. The torque vectoring rear axle in the RAV4 undoubtedly helps improve handling, but Toyota chose not to program this system to behave like the Acura super handling all-wheel drive system, so it's never going to cause the rear of the vehicle to kick out a little bit like a rear-wheel drive car or a rear-wheel biased all-wheel drive car like you can see sometimes in the Acura RDX. Next up, we have the Honda CR-V. It's a very well-rounded entry in this particular segment, very comfortable on the inside, it has a large cargo area, the optional turbocharged engine is great, but it's not as fast as the Mazda turbo. When you comparably equip the CR-V to the CX-5, they're going to be about the same price, but again, you're not going to find all those high-end luxury features in the CR-V that we do find in the CX-5, and it's going to be notably slower. On the downside for the CX-5, if you're taking a look at some of the lower end trims of the CX-5 with the naturally aspirated 2.5-liter turbo, the comparable CR-V model is going to be notably faster 0 to 60, and it's going to be more fuel efficient as well. The 1.5-liter Honda Turbo is a very fuel-efficient engine, and performance is very good for a base model in this particular segment. When you compare that 1.5-liter Turbo to most of the competitive options, it's going to perform very, very well. Now, as we've seen in other Honda models, that 1.5-liter turbo is not standard, but you will find it in just about all the trims on the dealer lot. Next up, we have the Kia Sportage, one of the few 2-liter turbos in this particular segment. You'll find that in the SX Turbo trim, and it has been detuned a little bit from the last generation Sportage, which I found a little bit disappointing. 240 horsepower is now what that engine puts out, and that makes it a little bit slower 0 to 60 than the Mazda. Now on the bright side, the Kia has standard 245 with tires on that particular model, and that helps it grip the road better than what we see in the CX-5. Overall handling is absolutely excellent in the Kia, although overall handling feel is actually a little bit better in the Mazda. In terms of overall price tag, the Kia can be a little bit less expensive than the Mazda with the 2.5-liter turbo, but remember that the Kia is available with front-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is actually optional on the SX Turbo. So once you've added that, the two vehicles end up right around the same price, although the Kia does have a much longer standard warranty. Next up, we have the Chevy Equinox. It also has an available 2-liter turbo, and here we're going to be talking not just about the Equinox, but also the very closely related GMC alternative. At $30,895, this is one of the less expensive ways to get more power in this segment. We get 260 horsepower and 262 pound-feet of torque and a 9-speed automatic transmission. I know that some people aren't the biggest fans of GM's 9-speed, but I actually have liked it. It doesn't behave like the ZF 9-speed that we find in some of the Honda and Acura products, but it does have more gear, so it does take a little bit of time for that transmission to hunt around, especially in passing maneuvers. As we see in the Kia, the overall performance in the Equinox is a little bit lower than the CX-5. 0 to 60 happens right around 7 seconds. It's also worth noting that the Equinox will get more expensive than the Mazda, up to $39,660 for the top-end trim of the Equinox. If you prefer the top-end GMC model, which I think is a little bit more attractive, then it'll set you back a whopping $41,730. Now, that said, General Motors' offerings are more likely to sell at bigger discounts on the dealer lot, but here we can only talk about MSRPs. That's because those discounts are constantly changing throughout the year. But again, you will find, generally speaking, higher discounts on the Chevy and the GMC than the Mazda that could help close that gap or make the Equinox less expensive even in those top-end trims. You just have to check out the local dealers around you. Before we move on, let's talk a little bit about the Acura RDX, because so many folks at facebook.com/AlexandAutos were asking for this particular comparison. The RDX is a luxury segment vehicle, or a near luxury segment vehicle, depending on how you want to look at it. Meanwhile, the Mazda is a mainstream segment vehicle, and that is important to keep in mind, because we find more premium features and more premium options available in the Acura. The Acura gets their latest 10-speed automatic transmission that was in-house developed that gives us a very aggressive starting gear and a very high final gear that helps it get better real-world fuel economy overall in mixed driving, and it also helps it get significantly better 0 to 60 performance. We also have a very different all-wheel drive system in the RDX. It can actually send the majority of engine power to the rear axle under certain situations, and the CX-5 will really never do that unless the front axle is slipping. So the RDX is definitely going to be the more dynamic option. It's also going to handle better than the Mazda. The Mazda has a very good on-center feel, very good driving dynamic to it, but it's not that next level up that we would find in the luxury or near luxury segments. The RDX is also a little bit larger feeling on the inside. We get a more comfortable rear seat, a more comfortable front seat than we find in the Mazda, and that larger cargo area in the back. Now, when it comes to overall value, yes, the CX-5 is the better value, but I think the RDX is the better vehicle. It's more sporty, it's faster, etc. But of course, it's going to be significantly more expensive. So if you're looking for that discount luxury vehicle, you could look at the CX-5 in that way, but it's not really playing in the same pool as the Acura RDX. With that out of the way, let's go back to the mainstream segment, because the Mazda CX-5 is still my top pick here. I would be willing to sacrifice that extra cargo capacity that we find in some of the larger options for the improved driving dynamics, the performance that we find in the 2.5-liter turbo, and honestly, the absolutely gorgeous exterior styling. Mazda's new turbocharged engine has really helped keep the CX-5 at the top of my recommended list, and to be perfectly honest, even without it, I still really like the CX-5, and there's still some great reasons to buy it over the competition. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and also click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel. That'll take you over to patreon.com. Find us over at facebook.com, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social things, and I'll see you next week.